We are now recording and we are starting the webinar. Gabby, give me 1 second. I think you're muted.
Yeah, you're.
Yes, I was muted.
Oh, thank you.
Good morning. I'm just going to give a little bit of time for people to continue to join us before kicking off this very interesting and exciting webinar. So I'll give another moment and then we'll start. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you're joining us from. I see that people are still joining, but in the meantime, I think we'll get started to make the best use of our time. So, welcome everyone. My name is Gabriela Gergely. I'm the ethics advisor at the Pan American Health Organization, or PAHO as we call it. For those of you who don't know about PAHO, PAHO is actually the world's oldest public health organization, created in 1902. And since 1949, PAHO has served as a regional office for the Americas for the World Health Organization. And together with WHO, we are incredibly pleased to welcome you all to this session, in which we will be exploring the impact digital content has on our brain and overall well-being. We're also pleased to provide simultaneous translation into Spanish and Portuguese, as well as international sign interpretation for, let's see how many of you are here now, the over 200 of you who have joined us today. We will also be recording this session and we'll share it so that those who were unable to join can watch, or if you'd like to share it with someone you think might be interested, we would welcome that. This morning, we're fortunate to have Dr. Caroline Leaf with us. She is a renowned neuroscientist and expert in brain science, mental health, and cognitive development. Today, she will be guiding us through an insightful session on a topic that is both timely and crucial. In a world where digital content surrounds us at every turn, from emails and social media to news feeds and video calls, it's easy to overlook how these constant streams of information influence not just our productivity, but also our mental health and overall well-being. Understanding these impacts is especially important for us as UN staff and personnel, as many of us work in high-pressure global environments where we must balance the demands of our roles with the needs to maintain our mental health, clarity, focus, and overall well-being to carry out our mandates. As we approach the International Day of Persons with Disabilities on December 3rd, we wanted to take this opportunity to invite reflection and spark a conversation on how this topic affects us all, including persons with disabilities. As we will learn in a few minutes, Dr. Leaf has conducted work among people with and without disabilities and will expand further on this topic. This responds to PAHO's commitment and willingness to create greater awareness on disability issues and the need to build a more inclusive work environment. In PAHO, we are currently working on various initiatives, including the December launch of a Disability Affinity Inclusion Group led by PAHO personnel from several countries such as Honduras, Brazil, and Chile. We are very excited about this because this will be a first for PAHO, though many of you might already have these resources. So today we are excited to learn from Dr. Leaf's expertise. We encourage you to actively engage. There will be a Q&A session, and we hope that you will participate and be active. And we hope you reflect on how the insights shared can improve both our daily lives and our work. Before we get started, I'd like to pass it over to Ana Solis, our amazing and committed PAHO WHO Honduras country representative and a member of the PAHO Disability Inclusion Affinity Group, who will kick off the event with some thoughts. Ana, over to you.
Thank you very much, Gabriela, and greetings to everyone tuning in from across the globe. I am Ana Emilia Solis Ortega, and I'm connecting with you from the vibrant heart of the tropics here in Honduras, one of Pajo's key countries. It's truly an honor to join you all this morning. Thanks to the English and Spanish interpretation available for this session, I will take the opportunity to continue in Spanish, the primary language spoken across the region of the Americas. Hoy estamos aquí para hablar cómo el mundo digital nos impacta. Y estamos aquí también para confrontar cómo esto nos afecta a un nivel personal, profundo y a menudo silencioso. La realidad es clara. Vivimos inmersos en una sobrecarga digital que exige mucho más de nosotros que simplemente adaptarnos o seguir adelante. Esta sobrecarga está dejando marcas en nuestra salud mental, en nuestra capacidad para conectarnos auténticamente con nosotros y en nuestra propia visión de bienestar. Y no se trata solo de productividad, se trata de nuestra humanidad, algo que ni el mejor de los algoritmos puede reemplazar. En medio de tanta tecnología, es fundamental recordar la importancia de las conexiones personales. Estamos perdiendo a veces, sin darnos cuenta, el contacto humano genuino, esa habilidad de sentir empatía, de entendernos mutuamente más allá de las pantallas. Esa conexión que en última instancia define nuestro sentido de comunidad y pertenencia. Eso se va desvaneciendo en un mundo que se mueve a un ritmo vertiginoso. Recuperarla y mantenerla es esencial para nuestra salud y para la cohesión de nuestros equipos, especialmente en una organización como la nuestra, que busca el bienestar integral de todos. En la OPS y en la OMS, hablar de inclusión no es simplemente una frase de moda o una estrategia para quedar bien. La inclusión debe reflejarse en cada decisión, en cada espacio y en cada esfuerzo por crear un entorno que sea realmente accesible para todos. Quiero hacer especial énfasis en nuestra iniciativa del Grupo de Afinidad e Inclusión para Personas con Discapacidad. El 3 de diciembre estamos celebrando ese día importante. ¿Y por qué? ¿Por qué queremos hablar sobre el grupo de afinidad para personas con discapacidad? Porque construir un ambiente inclusivo requiere mucho más que palabras bonitas o compromisos en papel. Requiere intencionalidad, acciones medibles y una verdadera voluntad para desmantelar barreras invisibles, muchas de las cuales nosotros mismos hemos ayudado a construir a veces sin darnos cuenta. Hoy quiero agradecer a la doctora Caroline Leaf, no solo porque está aquí como una experta en la neurociencia y salud mental, sino porque hoy su experiencia nos obliga a vernos en el espejo y a preguntarnos qué estamos haciendo para proteger nuestro bienestar y el bienestar de nuestros colegas. ¿Estamos actuando como verdaderos líderes de inclusión o estamos perpetuando dinámicas que al final limitan nuestra misión? Mi invitación es clara. Participen con intensidad, pregunten con sinceridad y reflexionen con profundidad. Este es un momento para transformar nuestra perspectiva. Es un momento no solo de la inclusión, sino de nosotros mismos en un mundo que avanza rápido, a veces más rápido de lo que estamos preparados para enfrentar. Gracias por estar aquí y gracias nuevamente a la doctora Leaf por acompañarnos hoy en este camino hacia una OPS y una OMS que sean más humanas y más íntegras. Buenos días. Over to you guys.
Thank you very much, Anna. I've got the privilege, I'm not Dr. Leaf, but I have the privilege of introducing, talking about Dr. Leaf. I'm really honored today to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Leaf. If you know something about Dr. Leaf, or if you've looked at her website, you would know that she developed a theory called the geodesic information processing theory. of how we think. We build memory and learn into tools and processes that have transformed the lives of hundreds of people around the world. So she's also worked with people, with individuals with traumatic brain injury, chronic traumatic. I can't actually pronounce that, so I'm just going to shorten it. It's CTE. She'll explain what that is. People with learning disabilities like ADHD or ADD, autism, dementia, mental health issues like anxiety and depression. Now, I don't mean to brag or anything, but I have something in common with Dr. Leaf, and it's not her accolades. It's because we both have an African background, Southern African background, and I love that. And I also absolutely love that some of her research was done in Africa, in the parts that I come from. And so I'm really privileged to be able to do the Q&A session with you, Dr. Leaf. And thank you so much for taking time in your very busy schedule to spend time with us today. And over to you, Dr. Leaf.
Thank you so much, Tendo. Thank you to everyone for inviting me, and thank you for the amazing work that you do. It's a privilege and honor, really, to be here with you today and to share my knowledge, which I hope will help you, because with all of us, mental health is a challenge. If you're alive and you're human, you're battling with your mind. And so it's such a normal thing to battle. And when we have these, we have these challenges and disabilities and all these things on top of it, it becomes even more difficult. And we know that with every generation, there's new challenges. And we know that our current generation faces the challenge of technology, which is a wonderful thing, technology. But if it's not managed correctly, we can have a massive gap between this wonderful technological advancement that we've made as humans and how we manage our mind. And if the gap grows, we can end up having quite a lot of mental health challenges. So yes, we are both. I was born in Zimbabwe, South Africa. I grew up in South Africa. I've been in the States for the last 15 years, but I spent the first 25 years of my career in South Africa working across the board in the apartheid era, the transition and the post-apartheid era, working in education, in schools, in the townships. And if anyone doesn't know what those are, it's our terrible situation that our government had created, but I'm sure you're all familiar with that. I had the privilege of going into those areas and helping people to understand their mind, deal with their emotions, deal with the challenges, learn how to learn, and just try to overcome and realize the power that is within each of us, and in a practical way help them to process this. I've done research for the past 38 years. I'm actually a psychoneurobiologist, and what that means is I research this whole mind-brain-body connection. So here we are as humans in life, and all these experiences are hitting us, including the digital age, and we're processing that into the energy fields of our mind, creating these patterns, and these patterns are then put into the brain. I mean, this is literally what happens, and then that becomes wired into the networks of our brain and our body. We set up the mind-brain-body connection, which is psychoneurobiology, and then those patterns are what drive us. And so that's what's happening daily. That is in addition to who you are, your unique you-ness, your unique identity and how you function. And then obviously a lot of the experiences that we have are not all great. We have good, bad, and ugly experiences, and all of that's wired into our network. And this whole lot are driving how we function, how we show up in life. Now, fortunately, we don't have to just learn to live with that. We are able to rewire those networks. So a large part of the work that I did, as Rutendo mentioned, I worked with neurological issues like dementias, autism, learning disabilities, and I also worked with men on the mental health side, respond to people going through adverse circumstances in their life, nested in the environmental circumstances of life, because nothing's in isolation, and how that impacted their mental health. So I've worked on both sides of the spectrum and practice, as I mentioned, clinically for 25 years. Myself and my research team, we've been going for 38 years now, doing research to look at how life is processed into us, becomes these networks, and how those impact us and how we can change them. And that's the key that I want to share with you today. So this concept of being able to deal with the experiences of the digital age, how those wire into our networks and how they influence us and how we can change that if it's had a negative impact, is something that we can learn to do. It's an ability that we have as humans, and it's in our mind. So each of us is empowered to be able to manage our minds in this way, and it'll make more sense as I'm explaining it. This concept of rewiring is known as neuroplasticity. A lot of you've probably heard of the concept. It's very popular now, but back in the 80s when I first started working, neuroplasticity was not even really a word that was used. We spoke more about neurology, and even neuroscience wasn't a word that was used. And when I was at university, we were told the brain couldn't change. So if something happened to you, a traumatic brain injury, which was also my area of speciality, or a bad experience, a trauma, well, pretty much that was it. And, you just got to learn to live with it. And I felt that outlook was so hopeless and also very contrary to the human experience, because we learn, we grow, we change, and we get through stuff, and we keep moving forward. So I started doing some research in if I can manage my mind, if I can learn how to process these things, can I change how I'm functioning? Can I change my social, emotional, cognitive functioning by rewiring the brain? Or if I've had some kind of brain damage, can I rewire the brain? And the answer to that is yes. 38 years later, thousands of research subjects later, we reach millions now with our platform. I can tell you, for people in the worst of the worst circumstances who've literally had trauma that you cannot believe, to those that have had terrible damage in their brain from whatever, to dementias, whatever, if you know how to learn how to manage your mind, you can rewire the brain. So I did some of the first neuroplasticity research back in the 1980s. And from the mid-90s, it was accepted as we advance in technology. It was understood that neuroplasticity is something that we as humans can actually, it's who we are. We're always changing. We change, we grow. And because we change, we grow is our mind. Our mind is not our brain. And what we do with our mind changes our brain. So probably the first place to start, and then I'm going to just show you some slides, is to help you to understand that the mind and the brain are separate. And this is very helpful because if we think of what technology is doing, which I'm going to explain as well, we see it happens to a part of the mind that we can change and a part of the brain that we can change. So yes, networks do get wired in that are disruptive, but we can actually rewire those. And that's what I'm hoping to share the basics of with you today. So I'm going to share my slideshow with you because I think it'll be easier for you to see some of these things, these concepts as I show with slides. So just give me 1 second here while I share my slideshow. Make sure we share the right thing here. There we go. Can you all see? Okay. So we're going to talk about, so literally I'm going to tell you about how you can rewire your brain. And why would that be important? Because of the impact of technology on our brain. So how to manage your mind, manage your mental health. So that's your brain. Now, your brain is not who you are. When you die, that brain goes. Within 30 seconds of your heart stopping, your brain is flatlined. And yes, we have CPR and those kinds of things, which can, once you can, there's a whole, where we can resuscitate people, but that doesn't necessarily mean we can get the brain back online. But the good news is that your memories are not stored in your brain. Only a perspective of your memories are stored in your brain. Your memories of your life are actually stored in 3 places, which is amazing. So our brain does get disrupted by technology, but that does not mean that your memories and your life has to change if you understand this process of how you can reverse engineer. So everything filters through the brain and the body. Okay. And because it filters through the brain and the body, what I mean by that is life, experiences, this conversation, your use of technology, the digital age, life, politics, all these things that are coming at us first go into the mind. And we'll talk about what the mind is in a moment. The mind then puts it into the brain, and the brain does change because it's always changing. Your brain is never the same. It's not the same now as it was when we started. Your brain is always changing. And that's neuroplasticity. And what we can do is we can learn to direct the change. So if we don't manage our mind, then we put chaos into our mind, chaos into our brain and body, and that means chaos in our life, because whatever's in the mind, brain, body network, that's how we show up. That's what's driving how we show up. So the brain changes in response, the body changes in response. And that means that if we change how we manage our mind, we can change those responses, which means we can change the structure of the brain. But I've also said that it goes in the body. So the brain stores one holistic perspective of a cluster of memories grouped into a thought. So thought is the whole experience. And as we know, an experience is made up of a lot of details. So if your experience of your job is a lot of memories, a lot of data. So it's your job is the thought, and all the details of what you do are the memories. And that's a thought in your brain. Your relationship would be another thought. Your political views would be another thought, and your relationship with your children or whatever. All of these are different thoughts, but made up of hundreds, thousands, however many memories. Now, they're in your brain. That's one place. They're in your body as well. Every single cell of your body is storing what you're experiencing. And we have 37 to 100 trillion cells collectively across the mind, brain, body, across the brain and the body. And so you're stored in your cells too. This is why when we have a traumatic experience and we recall it, we feel that in our body. Okay, there's a lot of information about that out there. So we've got to look at the embodied mind. So then what is the mind? The mind is an energy force. Now, I'm going to bring you guys, you're all tech savvy. We're all in the digital age. Now, let's think a third of the economy, of the world's economy, is based on microelectronics, which is basically the digital world. Now, that technology has an underlying science of quantum physics, energy, quantum physics, and all this. I'm not going to go into the detail of that, but the fundamental principles that drive technology, which is responsible for the third of the world's economy, is basically microelectronics. So if you want to understand mind, think of mind as its own version of microelectronics. So the same type of energy that drives the digital age is a similar type of energy that makes up mind. So you can see me, but around me and through me is my mind. If I was dead, my brain and body would be disintegrating, but I'm talking, I'm alive, my eyes are shining, I can do things, I'm breathing, and so are you. That is the energy of the mind going through the brain and the body. On a more sort of spiritual level, you could look at that as the spirit and the soul, and whatever you want to do. So on a scientific level, we call that the mind, and the mind has 3 levels. And the most obvious level of mind is our conscious mind when we're awake. A level that's not as well understood, and it's a field that I've been in for 38 years now, is the non-conscious, N-O-N, non-conscious mind. Now, this is a really important part of your mind because it operates 24/7. Unlike the conscious mind, which is only awake when you're awake, the non-conscious mind stores all those memories as electrical patterns, as the microelectric energy fields inside this network, this field that is around us, so biofield, and through us. It's the energy field that makes your heart beat, your lungs work, your brain work, your chemicals work in your body, your biochemistry, all of that's being driven by your mind. So that's why when a person dies, that energy is gone and everything stops. So the mind drives our neurophysiology, our ability to breathe and so on, and heart to pump. And it also drives our decision-making, our thinking, feeling, choosing, ability to love, appreciate a sunset, have this conversation, and so on. The uniqueness of you, that is your mind, it's expressed through your mind. So this energy that is around and through us, we are, let's take this conversation. I'm giving you information, and you take this information into your mind, and it's energy, and you create an energy field, and it's in a pattern. And this is good information. So this pattern is healthy pattern. It's the correct frequencies, and delta, theta, beta, and gamma. It's all the correct frequencies. It's the correct, good microelectronics, okay? And quantum physics, I'm trying to use words as simple as possible for you. So, and that goes into your brain. It literally moves into your brain and body, and that then causes a genetic expression. As the energy field hits the physical substance of brain, there is a reaction, a response, and proteins are formed, or amino acids, proteins, chemicals, and this experience is captured as a bunch of memories and built into a thought. And that looks like the little neurons that you see pictures of, little branches are growing. And then in your body, we have a similar thing happening. It happens at the same time, but it's slightly different versions. So it's like different perspectives. The holistic thing is in the brain, and then different perspectives are in the cells of the body. So now let me show you another. Okay, so here, just very quickly, the mind uses the brain. So the mind is not the brain. The mind uses the brain, and that information is processed through the brain and body. So we see the impact on in the brain, but not the cause in the brain in terms of things like the digital era. It's not that the brain is causing the problem. It's that the way we use our mind is causing the problem. Okay, so the non-conscious is where everything is stored, operates 24/7. and the conscious, and it drives the conscious mind. Then you get the subconscious, which is in between the two. It's like a little bridge. So non-conscious is this huge 24/7, your intelligence, your brilliance, your uniqueness, your wisdom. It's phenomenal on your side. It never stops. It's working when you're sleeping. Your conscious mind is what we use to function during the day or when we're awake, at night as well, obviously. And this whole combination is causing our brain to change. Now, the good thing is we can drive the direction of change. If you don't drive the direction of change, which means if you don't drive neuroplasticity is happening anyway. So then it could be going in the wrong direction. So therefore, if we immerse ourselves in technology and we don't know how to manage it properly, and we don't know how to take the breaks, understand the impact, read the signs in our body, then what we do is we have chaos in our mind, conscious mind, and that then puts chaos into the brain, the proteins, chemistry, all that stuff goes chaotic, and we build networks that are chaotic. And over time, those networks start working against the natural functioning of our brain and our body. So our brain and our body are wired for love. I mean, that's what Nobel Prize winning scientists, what they've literally said, which means our biology is on our side. So if we create chaos in our mind and then we create chaos in our body, over time, the chaos builds, increases our vulnerability to disease and mental health challenges. And that's why we battle with mental health if we don't manage something like technology. Obviously, there's a lot of other reasons for mental health, but this talk is kind of focused around the impact of technology. So let's have a look quickly at some slides. Here, this is a technology, a combination of different brain technology. You're going to see the slide moving. It's from the Gasly lab. And it is this is a real alive person, and they are connected to all this technology. They're breathing, they're alive, and they're being asked a bunch of questions, and they're reading, and they're thinking, and they're doing a bunch of different stuff. What you're seeing here is this energy field of the mind, your aliveness, this ability to drive the physiology as well as your thinking, feeling, and choosing who you are, your experiences of life. That's what you're seeing inside the brain. You're seeing that fired up energy. You would not see this in a dead person, because there's no energy going into the brain. Now, that is what makes the brain respond. And also we have that energy flowing through the body. I only have the picture here of the brain, but we have the same energy flowing through the body. And this makes changes. There's structural changes happening in the brain and the body in response. So as you get stuck in your technology and you don't, if accessibility is not correct, so in other words, if you are battling with maybe sight or any kind of disability, hearing impaired or whatever it may be, if it's hard to process something, then the energy that goes into the brain first starts as a little bit of chaos in the mind, and the energy field that's built in the mind is not going to be clear. It's going to be kind of messy, and then that puts messiness in the brain, and then a messy network is built, and then that can create a lot of frustration and anxiety and mental health issues. And also over time, it wears down our body, and that increases our vulnerability to disease. It's not straight away, but it's over time, cumulatively, our vulnerability to disease without a managed mind increases by 35 to 98%, which is a significant figure. This next slide, and I'm just going to turn the sound on quickly, is showing this close-up. It's showing how that fire of the brain you saw in the previous slide is actually stimulating the growth of networks. This is in the brain and the body. This is inside cells. And this is what I mean when I say that the energy of the mind hits the brain, magic happens, and we have proteins, amino acids, proteins, chemicals, and all these things forming. So your experience wires in and becomes this network. So it's an energy field in the brain, like a pattern. It's a wired network in your brain that's more like a tree-like structure, and in your body it looks more like a hedge, like a little hedge structure. So it becomes this. This is now a very famous old slide that shows these networks in the brain that form. So this is what you're growing at the moment, and each one is a thought, and the details that you see, the branches of the memories, and this forms throughout the body. And the equivalent of this in the mind is a pattern, an energy pattern, an energy field, and they're connected by an invisible thread. So it's mind, brain, body. That's kind of how the connection works. So there's your standard that we're all familiar with, what the networks look like in the brain, or the neurons look like in the brain, where memories are formed into thoughts are in the dendrites. You can see at the top, they look kind of like Christmas trees, and that's Christmas coming around the corner. This is a slide from, this also shows a great slide showing this concept as well of the neurons and how they grow into these networks. And it's, just that the whole idea is just beautiful. This shows these are the networks that I'm talking about that drive us, but that can be changed. Okay, so just a summary. Memories cluster together to form thoughts. Thoughts look like trees in your brain and hedges in your body and energy fields in your mind. And therefore thoughts are physical structures. And then the roots are the source of the experience. Okay, so when I talk about managing our mind, what I'm talking about is the following. And I'm going to keep the slide up and quickly just tell you this because we're going to move into questions very soon. So if we think about the mind, every day we're experiencing, from the moment we open our eyes to the moment we go to sleep, we are getting all this information coming into our energy field, and these little groupings of energy are formed into the brain, that orange fire, and then the little things are growing, and this is growing, this is happening all day long. That's neuroplasticity in action. Now, when we self-regulate, when we manage our mind, specifically related to technology, we are, well, everything, but we're talking technology today. What that means is that we're going to then create more order. Think of the conscious mind. The conscious mind is when you're awake. Then you've got the subconscious, just as a reminder, which is like a bridge between the two. It's a portal. Then you get the non-conscious, NON. The unconscious that a lot of people talk about, that's when you're asleep. It's not a brain state. So it's not, you can't go into your unconscious mind. It's a brain state that when you're asleep or under anesthesia. So we've got to talk, when we talk about the thinking stuff, the intellectual stuff, the cognitive stuff, we talk about conscious, subconscious, non-conscious. Non-conscious being the big 24/7 thing, driving everything, all your memories and clustered into thoughts. Subconscious is the bridge between the two and the conscious. So what's happening is life goes into the non-conscious first, and it scans and finds what's not good for you and gets rid of most of it, but some of it keeps. And especially if you have an existing network that is a worry network about whatever, or something that's already had quite a lot of attention, whatever you think about the most grows. So whatever you've paid attention to is going to be a strong network in your energy field and in your brain and your body. And then it tends to draw in more. So the more you have similar information, it kind of finds, oopsie, I know about that. That's that thing I was worrying about. Here's more to worry about. And it kind of adds more to that. And then your unconscious mind sends messages to the subconscious saying, hey, don't pay attention to that. That's going to make you feel worse. And if we, and that's don't pay attention comes through in our emotions. You'll suddenly feel, phew, a whoosh of anxiety. And then as you feel the whoosh of anxiety, you'll feel it through your body. Maybe you get, your heart starts beating fast. Then that you'll notice it in your behavior. Maybe your face changes completely. And then you'll notice it in your perspective. Oh, life sucks. So those four are signals that are prompts from the non-conscious moving through the conscious, through the subconscious into the conscious mind to tell us to pay attention. So if I don't pay attention, so if I'm overusing technology, not taking breaks, getting frustrated, letting myself get into this, just getting sucked into fear of, FOMO, missing, whatever the whole social media side of things, or not giving myself enough brain breaks and body breaks, our brain gets very tired. Our body gets very tired. Our conscious mind gets very tired. Our unconscious mind is never tired. So very often we think we can keep going, but we don't. We can't. And if we don't take those regular breaks, we're just creating more and more mess. So come back to the conscious mind very quickly and imagine the conscious mind has also got two parts to it. A messy part, that's great. It's how we get through life. We got to experiment, and it's a bit like the toddler mind. You know how a toddler experiments, and what does the parent do? The parent is guiding. So life comes in, and we have our toddler mind response first. And if you just let the toddler mind go wild, you know what's going to happen. Anyone who's a parent or seen a toddler, you know what happens. So the parent comes in to guide. So when I talk about managing our mind, I'm talking about the parent part of our conscious mind guiding. And now the parent needs advice. So the parent tunes into the subconscious, and the subconscious is holding bits of advice from the non-conscious. We're very wise as humans. We have all our wisdom inside of us. We need to tune into that non-conscious mind. This is very scientific. It's nothing weird or wonderful. This is science. I've shown with my research that you can get control of your mind and control of anxiety and depression by up to 81%. And in this rewiring process that I'm talking about. So the first thing is we want to understand that if we just ignore the parent part of our conscious mind, then we ignore the subconscious that's sitting there with all this wisdom, and the non-conscious is going, oh, please listen, and we're not listening, and we ignore all of that wise wisdom, and we then have this messiness that gets more and more messy. Whatever you think about the most grows, sits in the brain and body growing, and we can set up a very negative cycle. And that creates these patterns. Now we hear this in the current media as we create addictive patterns in our brain, and that affects our dopamine. And they've simplified something very complex. It's not quite as simple as you get dopamine rushes from being on technology, and that's what causes, and you get stuck in dopamine, and that causes your mind to break down. There are hundreds of chemicals, and they all work in different ways. And dopamine is not just related to the addictive cycle. And there's a whole, and chemicals are only in response to what we do with our mind. So it's not that those are only driving it. The primary thing is a messy mind messes up the balance of dopamine, serotonin, anandamide, all the different chemicals that we need, neurotransmitters and so on, to get the brain and body working properly. Serotonin, which is 95% in our gut, and all that kind of thing. That balance gets thrown off. And when the balance gets thrown off, chaos will ensue. And all the parts of the brain and the body that are supposed to do what they're doing kind of get stuck. And when they get stuck, that then will result in increased anxiety, increased depression, even behavior. And these are not biomedical diseases. These are not diseases. Mental health is not a disease. Mental health is a response to experiences. And those experiences can be adverse. So if you're battling with accessibility, high levels of frustration will create an adverse circumstance that is nested within the whole environment of not being able to access information, on top of the fact that you're absorbing all this stuff from life, on top of the fact that there's this messiness that's been created, and all that mess then creates networks in the brain that then show up in our signals of emotions, behaviors, bodily sensations, and perspectives that are becoming disrupted. So what we, in a big picture, and then we can dive into the questions, is we as humans can learn. And we've seen this with the research I've shown within 9-week cycles, because it takes 9 weeks to break down these networks. Let me for a moment digress. When we have a network that's driving us, it's a habit. We've all heard of habits. We've also all heard that habits take 21 days to form. Well, that's not true. Part of my work over the last 38 years is to look at how long does it take for a habit to actually form. And it's not 21 days, it's a minimum of 63 days. And if it's a big trauma that you're dealing with, and trauma is never in isolation, it's nested within circumstances and multiple things generally, and your trauma of not being able to access information, that's a traumatic experience nested within the whole socioeconomic situation and all the different things that are unique to your experiences. That's big stuff. It's a lot of stuff. And to just fix that up is not going to go away in 63 days. It's going to be multiple cycles of 63 days. So what we see in the research is that if I've ignored my parent mind and I've got stuck in the toddler mind and I've set up this network, it's this mess that just keeps reinforcing. I have to train myself to listen to the parent, and for the parent has to listen to the subconscious and the non-conscious. And that cycle alone of learning to self-regulate, which is mind management, will take you 63 days to develop. Once you're in that cycle of self-mind management, then you can take all the elements that are blocking you. So the frustration from whatever, everyone's got their things. You take one thing at a time, one thought at a time, and you start working through that. Now, what do you do? Okay, what do you do is this is what I researched, developed theories and science and tested and all that stuff. And we have DHMI, we have a digital mental health technology platform to help people. So I've put all this stuff into digital mental health. And we have tried to fulfill all the correct accessibility requirements, but I'm happy if someone uses my technology and there's something not right, we will adjust. But essentially what I've found is that for what there's steps involved, you listening to me now, to get what I'm saying into your head and to wire it into your networks. This is just a moment in time. For this to stick, you're going to have to think of these things and go through this information over the next 63 days, 5 or 10 minutes a day. What do you do? How do you get something into the network in an organized way? Well, that was a massive part of my research. If it's 63 days, what is directed neuroplasticity? What is the actual step-by-step process? What is the system, in other words? And the system is what I researched. And the system is simplified all this complex science into a 5-step process. And the 5-step process is we first need to become aware of our signals. We have to train ourselves, not just general awareness of I'm anxious, but very specifically, I am anxious about. I feel this in my body. This is influencing my behaviors in this way. This is affecting my perspective in this way. And it's all in this moment. We work in the now moment because life is a series of now moments. So we deal with now. In dealing with now, we'll then deal with the past. Once I have my signals, I can then say, why? Why am I doing this and start and answer each of those 4 questions. So it's very organized, very processed. This is what your mind, brain, body network wants. It wants you to gather focused awareness, do focused reflection. And then as you do that, you're going to bring the network, that what you've done is you've opened a door between the toddler mind, the parent mind, the subconscious waiting room, and the non-conscious. And the whole of you says, phew, thank goodness, now you're going to listen. And as you do, that's what the first 2 steps will do. We'll open the doorway. And now we can start, what will happen is the 3rd step is a mind storm. What does these first 2 steps generate? And that's where things will start coming from the subconscious mind into the conscious mind. We can't accept everything from the non-conscious because it's too fast. So the non-conscious has to channel it into the subconscious. It's slowed down, and then we send through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 things every few seconds. So we get these things coming up and down, up and down. And what we can learn to do in this process is in the 3rd step, as these things are coming up, we go to all of these are limited time, about a minute per each of these steps. You go to the 4th step, which is then, okay, all this stuff is here. I've asked these questions, I've gathered awareness of these signals, I've reflected on them, I've done this mind storm. Now, what does this mean today, at this moment? How can I reconceptualize? How can I shift my perspective? How can I manage this in this moment? And then create an action. And the action is what you carry through to get you through the day. Now, that's a very broad overview. But that's what you do for every day for 63 days, for somewhere between 10 to 15 minutes for the first 21 days, because that's how you'll deconstruct and reconstruct a new network, because you can't pull the network out and throw it away. You deconstruct and reconstruct, and then for the balance of the 42 days, you stabilize. You do the same 5 steps over 5, around about 5 minutes. Now, as you do that system, deliberately and intentionally daily, set your intention to do that. You can also start with some meditation and breathing, and I do all of that in my materials. If you're interested, you can go and see. I've got lots of examples and tell you exactly how to do it. But if you start with some kind of breathing to focus you, or meditation or whatever, do those 5 steps. What happens within 21 days is the tree represents the networks that go through the mind, brain, and body. The one side is toxic and the other side is healthy. If you stop at day 21, so okay, let me start from the beginning. The network is the whole thing. The source, the roots are the source, and where this thing started from, where this messy mind started. Everything has a story, as it has an origin. Every story has an origin. So I go from my signals, I do those 5 steps, and I start getting to the root. I can't just pull the thought out, unfortunately. I have to weaken that root and rebuild. So it's a deconstruction and reconstruction process. So the 5 steps each day are doing this neuroscientific, psychoneurobiological thing. So you drive it with your mind, and it has this psychoneurobiological effect. And by day 21, you've actually halfway. So a lot of people think that, habits, as I mentioned, are formally 21 days, but you're half and half. So you could easily revert back to the old pattern, the old habit. You have to push through. So you see the other side, the old habit has become small and ineffective. And it's just a part of that's how I was, because we don't forget our stories, but we've changed how it looks inside of us. We've changed our neuroplasticity structure, and you now influence how it's going to drive us in the future. So you could see in terms of technology that toxic, ugly looking part of the tree, that's created this network that's messy and affecting how we function. So as we do this slowly over time, we can rewire and reconstruct our networks. Yeah, I know that's a lot of information, and I can show you a lot more slides, but let's jump to the questions. This is just the process. Let me end off with this. I know this is a very overwhelming slide, but this is the process of how you drive your neuroplasticity, how you rewire the networks. If you just look from the middle out. So the middle N, that's the name of the system. It's called the neurocycle. There's the first step, gather. Okay, so I'm going to use my cursor to see if I can get it over there. Okay, it's not working, sorry. Gather, then reflect, then write, recheck. Write is the mind storming 3rd step, recheck is the 4th step, active reach is the 5th step. The phase 1 is the first 21 days. Phase 2 is days 21 to 42 and 42 to 63. And then down the side is just the description of what I said. So there's a simple explanation of those 5 steps. And as I said, you can get a lot more information. But I think let's jump over to the questions. I think that the timing is right now. So I'm going to stop sharing. And I've got a lot of other slides, if necessary, that we can share. And I'll hand over to you.
I don't know I don't know if it's correct for me. I think everybody's feeling the same, like, there's so much
Yeah.
information that I didn't know about how I'm wiring the way I live my life. And it's interesting that as we live in a digital world and as the world moves in a different in this digital era, there's I think there's a lot of research, but there's very minimal that we actually understand of how we adapt and how we connect with each other. I mean, right now, it's a privilege that we get to connect like this with 335 of us online in this digital world. And it's such a privilege, and it's such a good thing. But in your research, how does too much digital content affect our mental health, and especially for people with accessibility needs?
Okay, beautiful question. And yes, there is a lot. And just think of it like as a big picture summary, and then I'll directly answer the question. Think of the fact that most people don't realize how this thing works because we're not taught this. But if you understand this, you actually have control back. And the biggest thing with mental health is people feel out of control. I can tell you as a clinician who work with thousands of patients of all different kinds of issues, and now we reach millions on our platform, and from the thousands of emails and questions we get, empowerment is priority. People feel out of control and want to be empowered to feel in control. So my overarching message is that your brilliant mind is in you, and it's that messiness you feel is not a brain disease, and it's not a permanent state. You can change it. You can't change what's happened to you, but you can change how it's wired, and you can rewire that. And all of life is going in every day, and when we become aware and self-regulate, that's when we can change things. So directly related to technology, I actually made a statement down here. Technology is not the enemy unless we allow it to be the enemy. Technology is phenomenal. As we know, it's given people, I mean, education-wise alone. I mean, you on the spot, you can double check, you can fact check, you can get knowledge. I think of the days back in the 80s when I was doing my master's, and I've done 4 degrees. I had to go and sit in a library and use the microfiche at UCT and University of Victoria. Tanda, you probably know those universities.
Yeah.
You probably don't even know what a microfiche, maybe some of you here do. We would sit there
I
and
don't.
go
I'm
through.
too young.
Oh, you're too young. There you go. So this little thing that you would scroll across and you'd find your research, and then you'd go to the librarian and they'd print. I mean, literally, that was hours and days. Now I can get my research on the spot. I can spend in an hour, I can find all the studies I need for one, whatever. So that access is amazing. And our brain is brilliant. It's structured brilliantly because our mind is brilliant. So the brilliance is not really in your brain. Your brain has just got to house the brilliant mind. You're brilliant. That's what you've got to start with. You are absolutely outstandingly brilliant. If nothing else has shown me in the research I've done over the last 40 years, I understand the brilliance of the human mind. And I want to encourage you, that's really where it starts, because understanding you are brilliant and you have it in you, and there's something you can do that no one else can do, is a really good starting off mindset to have, because that changes immediately. Just that statement will change your neurophysiology. And it may take you 63 days to believe me. Then you can work on those 5 steps daily for 63 days to believe you are brilliant. But I've done the science. You can go read my research papers. I publish in journals. I've got a very informative website if you want to know more. I have a podcast too that you can go listen to all these things. Okay, so that's the first thing. You're brilliant. Your mind is brilliant, but the toddler mind takes over too much. So if technology is not managed, it gets stuck in the toddler mind. Why? Because the brain is just doing what it's being told to do. And the brain is structured in such a way as each different part of the brain responds to different things. So for example, the frontal lobe gets very fired up when we in a deep cognitive process. Like now, if I had to link you all up to technology, we would see a lot of activity in the frontal lobe. It doesn't mean that the frontal lobe is making your decisions, which is the language that they use. Your frontal lobe can't do that. It doesn't mean your amygdala, that we hear so much about, your amygdala response is your fear response. Your amygdala can't do anything, nor can your frontal lobe. It's only responding. So if you're messy, you make your frontal lobe messy, you make your amygdala messy, you make your hippocampus, and all these fancy structures that we hear about. And then if that messiness continues, then it creates this broken network, and those parts of the brain just don't work very well, nor do the parts of the body, and the connection between the mind and body network tends to break down. So the quickest way to fix it is to develop your self-regulation. So then technology, because your brain is like this, it responds to, it is hungry for stimulation. Your mind is hungry for stimulation, but the part of your mind that's the hungriest for stimulation is your non-conscious, because it never gets tired. It's just infinite in its power and ability. And but it's also very wise. It's your wisdom, it's your intelligence. So therefore it knows what you can and can't handle. So if the non-conscious mind just shoots through a whole lot of stuff all the time, you'd be overwhelmed and you couldn't live, you couldn't survive. So with technology, what we're doing is we are firing through the toddler mind, which is the first, if you want to look at that, what receives information first? Toddler mind. That's the first layer of mind. And so if toddler mind receives something, and if toddler mind isn't listening to the parent, toddler mind then puts this in the brain. The brain just does what toddler mind tells it to do. Oh, yay, nice. Lots of exciting sweets, toys, stimulation, and it goes crazy, and networks start building through the brain and the body. And then if we don't take a break, then we get sucked in and we get more and more, our decision-making gets more and more disrupted because you're trying to work through a hurricane of mess. But if we say, oh, okay, I recognize this. How can I recognize this? Look at your signals. So the first thing you want to do is look at your signals. Stand back, observe yourself, and say, okay, take a deep breath. I'm very irritable. Why am I very irritable? Totally frustrated. I'm angry. Okay, that's great. No judgment. Let's just say, how are you feeling? I'm irritable, angry, frustrated. Where am I feeling it in my body? My shoulders are tense, my heart's pounding. What is it affecting you? I'm snapping at everyone and I want to throw this computer over my balcony. Perspective, this sucks. I can't do this anymore. Okay, that's a very simple example, but it's okay. You've started self-regulating. And that already, just those 2 steps have already changed all your neurophysiology. You've stood back, you've observed, you've taken control, you've brought that, you've allowed open the doorway between the toddler mind to start listening to the parent mind and so on. So that network that is messy, you can start cleaning up the networks. So that's literally what we have to do, because the technology is messing with those networks. And then if you don't, then you watch more and more TikTok. I mean, you've seen how someone can spend hours on TikTok, and a child can get stuck in and an adult on just going down one thing after another, watching one YouTube after another. And it's because you're stuck in the toddler mind. So you just got to stop. Okay, let's stop. Let's stand back. Let's assess. Let's self-regulate. Let's observe. We are able to stand back right now. If I tell you to go into a multiple perspective advantage, or MPA, multiple perspective advantage. It's your ability to stand back. You can do this with me right now. Stand back and observe yourself as though you're floating above your body. I can see me in the camera, but I'm actually watching me from out there, if that makes sense. I can watch now. Now I'm observing. How are my lips moving? What am I doing with my hands? Am I speaking slowly enough? Because I speak really fast. I have to slow myself down. See what I'm saying? That's skill you can learn to do all day long. And that is absolutely key to activating the part of your brain and mind-body network, your mind-brain-body network. Never just say brain, always network, your mind-brain-body network, to open up so that you can find the wisdom to then start the rewiring process. And I'm not saying that if you've been doing something for 63 days or longer, it's a habit. You're going to have to go through at least one, maybe more cycles to rewire. But that standing back alone, what I've just described, it will change your day, it will change your life. There's a lot of other techniques, but you want to ask me the next question, and then
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I do. So I really like how, you talk about how you have the power to actually change it. And I think that's a really powerful thing to be reminded of, that it's not like a lost cause to say, let's say, for example, I have an accessibility need or a learning disability or anything, and I feel, I'm so bogged down, how can I do this? We actually do have that power. But also, how do poorly designed spaces, because some of us work in a space where we actually design digital spaces, how do these affect other people's thinking, focus, and how might they impact people with mental resilience and productivity?
Such a great question. So if I can give an example in terms of when I worked with children with learning disabilities or severe autism, or someone who's got dementia, or someone who's got Parkinson's, their whole environment is different. The way that they're looking, not intelligence-wise, but the way that they're experiencing life. And so if we don't have a ramp so that someone can get up in the wheelchair, if we don't have big enough writing, if we don't have sound that you can turn up or closed captions, it's horribly frustrating. So frustration rises, and frustration is something that is very closely linked to anger. Now, the minute that you have frustration and anger, you're going to have depression as well. You're going to get elements of depression, and none of these are brain diseases. These are emotional signals. So those will rise, but because their salience is so strong, they then impact how your body feels, because the 4 signals are emotions, behaviors, the emotions, bodily sensations, behaviors, and perspectives. They never live alone. So if I'm feeling the frustration, I'm going to feel it in my body. It's going to come out in my behaviors. It's going to come out in my perspectives. And so the first, I mean, there's so many things here, but from a high level, and you can train yourself to recognize those. You're already starting to win the battle of not letting your brain get any more damaged. And remember, if your brain's damaged, you can fix it, okay? Your brain gets damaged by just getting irritated. But as we get our irritation under control, we rewire our brain, okay? So it's really important that we get into that self-regulated state. So the frustration and anger and depression are very, very strong emotional signs that will lead to behavioral and perspective things that can, especially the perspective, especially, well, life sucks, I can't do this, I want to give up. It's very, very frustrating, and cumulatively that can create physical problems in the body as well, because it wears that messiness. That frustration adds another layer. And think of a storm transforming into a tornado, into a hurricane. I'm in Florida and Miami, and I mean, you've seen the devastation. That's what's happening. It can create a hurricane and damage, but if we can stop the hurricane, we can fix the damage. And yes, there's always going to be that damage and we can rebuild, but that is what is actually happening. It creates tremendous strain. And that's why I can't stress enough that what I would do with my patients is not dive directly into trying to improve their learning disability. I'd work first into helping them navigate the frustration, get them into a place of calmness, and then immediately transition, even in the same session, was always in the same session, into learning something. So here's the other key, is we want to get ourselves into that self-regulated state. So stand back, observe yourself, and do that quick little exercise to get those emotions. And then you'll know, I'm frustrated because I can't get this digital space is driving me crazy. So you know that, but you need to process that. It's kind of like flying a plane. If you prepare a plane, that's great. But if you don't fly it, it's not going to go anywhere. If you prepare it and take off and fly and land, you're doing the right thing. But what a lot of us are doing is we are getting stuck in, oh, I'm frustrated, I'm irritated, I can't do this. And we're getting stuck and the plane's just not even taking off. Or you are becoming aware and the plane's taking off, but you don't process. And you know what the reason is. You know it's because the digital space is not arranged correctly, but you don't process through and acknowledge those emotions. So there's just this and the behaviors, all the signals. So you just don't go through, you don't fly and you don't land. Just take off and crash, take off and crash, take off and crash. And that's not good. So what we want to do is first get ourselves to gather awareness and do the whole thing, take off, fly and land. And now I can do that same cycle, but now I can start learning something. So I can, I may have to, I'm just giving myself an example. I may have to get myself to a better space, maybe by reading some fiction or doing a thinker moment or taking some new knowledge that I can learn in my own way. So in other words, what you do first is manage the emotional side, that emotional response signals with it. And then you're going to go over and you're going to use the same 5 steps to do something that is constructive. So some brain building. So there's first getting yourself in that mental health calmer state, and then you brain build. Now, the reason those two work so hand in hand is because you now put yourself in a state that you can actually say, this is what I need to cope now, and this is what I'm going to do to make it myself cope better in the future. In other words, you're going to access solutions, or you're going to access the words to write the email to get the solutions in place. Otherwise, you're just going to have this constant ongoing thing. So the brain building aspect are things like pick up a fiction book. You can't believe how you may think, I've got no time for this. Listen, you're going to just get worse and worse and worse. So doing the calming down exercise that I explained, multiple perspective advantage, the 5 steps, you can do that in a minute or 2, 5 minutes. Then take 10 minutes and get a really great fiction book. There's some great ones out there, something that interests you, and read the story. There's something about stories, and I've done a lot of research on this as well, that helps to get that brain into the parent state and tapping into the wisdom. It gets you to a point where your mind becomes creatively opened. Then you could do that. Plus you could do, what are you interested in? So for me, I'll do that calming down thing with the 5 steps. Then I will grab I'm always reading something. I'll read for 5 to 10 minutes. Then I will take my research that I love and I'll go and pull up digitally. I'll pull up one of my research papers that or areas that I'm working on, and I will make it easy for me to work on. Like I'm 61. I don't have the same technologies you do, Ratenda. I mean, my kids, my team, four of my kids work for me. They're always saying, my skills are good, but they're not great. So I know what frustrates me. So I'll do something that won't frustrate me. So I know how to manage it. And I'll do an exercise like the sciencey thing that I love, and I'll do it in a way that's easy for me. I'll either print out a document and work from that, or I'll work in a Google Doc that I know I can manage, but I won't try and use a new technology. That's what I'm trying to say. So I'm going to use something that's easy for me, that I don't have any kind of accessibility issue, and it's something that I love, and I'm going to stimulate my brain. So I've calmed down my mental health. I've got some creativity going with the story, and I'm now going to do something that I know is super interesting and that will make me excited. Then I will go back and tackle the issue, but I've prepared myself. And that whole exercise of those 3 parts, you could literally do between 5 and 15 minutes. And it's a game changer to help to turn that crazy space into something constructive.
Thank you. I really like how, there's 2 parts to this. Yes, there are people who perhaps work in my field who have the responsibility to build spaces that are accessible for everyone. And it helps people like me to understand that it's not just about making a cool website or a cool gadget or a cool PowerPoint presentation or a cool document that people need to read online or PDF. It's also about making sure that the stuff that I'm putting out there is stuff that can be consumable in a way that people can process in an easy way, not to trigger them. But at the same time, also how important it is to take control, to go through those steps whenever we feel irritated or frustrated with the way the space that we're in is affecting us, and taking control of our lives. And I really appreciate that. Now, I don't want to be selfish. I do have one more question, but I'm going to give over to Anna or Gabriela for the Q&A. Because lots of people have really itching questions that there's like 14 questions in the Q&A section. So for us to be able to go through them, I think Anna will take over from me. Thank you so much, Dr. Leaf.
My pleasure.
I really enjoyed having this conversation with you.
Thank you. So did I. You asked great questions.
It has been great to be listening to you. There are some questions, interesting questions in the Q&A, and there is one especially that talks about our work, and it says, what are the implications of your research for public health policy?
That's such a good question. Okay, so I get asked often that if I had to make a change to the mental health crisis currently, what could I do? What would be my biggest contribution? And my biggest contribution would be to educate people on how to manage their mind. And so in terms of policy, that would be something, and I actually, in this United States, I was actually getting into a stage where I was working with our current Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy. We were starting to look at some things with policy changes and so on a very low level. But that is, in terms of policy, what we need to do is educate. We go very high level with very big things, which we need to do, but we do need to start at the core with an individual, helping people to understand the basic principles that I've shown you today, because these principles are going to guide us in having clearer understanding to verbalize the exact policies that are needed. So education would be educate people in these principles and help them to understand, because everyone's battling with their mental health in trying to solve the problems of the world we live in. So we can tackle that and help people to regulate their minds and increase access to our intelligence. When we fight and argue in a mental health state, we're not as intelligent, we're not tapping into this brilliance that we have. So that would be a priority for me.
There are some questions that are very personal in the chat, Dr. Leaf, and people want to understand a little bit more, because we work under a lot of stress. We have a question from a colleague who works in the humanitarian area, and he said he doesn't have 63 days to to manage this because he is in a constant stress. He is on that turmoil. He is there, not in the eye of the hurricane because that's like in the center and calm, but he's in the hurricane itself. So how can someone who is subject to that kind of stress can rewire the brain, as you say? How can he get the calm and go through the stages?
I'm so glad you asked that question. It's a question I also get asked a lot and worked with people. I have worked with people all my years that are in constant crisis situations. So here's the first part of the answer. The first part is that your brain is changing anyway. So in the next 63 days, it's changed anyway. So all you're doing is you're introducing a control element. Instead of it just changing in a reactive way, you are now changing your brain in a responsive way. So you're turning into responding as opposed to reacting. So whether you like it or not, in 63 days' time, your brain has changed. The direction of change is still going to be chaos if you don't bring mind management in. So that's the first part. The second part is each moment counts. Just listening to this talk has already changed you. It's already given you a tool. So those 5 steps you can do if you're in the middle of a crisis. I mean, I am often called into crisis situations in my work, and I have over the years, and I have to deal with things on the spot just to get my mind into that state. I can be looking at you right now and listening to your issue, and I can run through those 5 steps, which I know neuroscientifically are opening up my mind so that I can have wisdom in the next moment. So if I can practice just doing it now in the moment, as I go through the day, you get really skilled at then, in other words, what I'm saying is you're using the 5-step process all day long because it's mind management. So you become really good at getting the chaos under control and training yourself to listen to the parent part and tapping into the wisdom of the unconscious. So that's in the now moment. So you don't have to say, okay, I'm not going to function for 63 days. Not at all. You are just doing it every day. Before you know it, 63 days has happened. And you've learned the first skill, which is how to manage my moment by moment. That's so important. From there, you can then say, okay, well, maybe while I get ready in the morning when I'm in the shower and cleaning my teeth and getting dressed, which is about maybe a 15-minute time period, I can then just work on something personally. I can run through these things in my head and maybe take a few moments as I'm having my coffee over breakfast, just because there is a writing section that you can then just write down. And so you can then train. That's what I do. I have a very busy life. I run a research team. I have 4 adult children. I'm part of my days like your days. It never stops. It can go 15, 20 hours a day, but I don't, because I know what that does to me. So that you can do immediately. Another thing that will help you in those crisis moments as well is to take regular thinker moments, THINKER, thinker moments. A thinker moment helps the brain, body, and conscious mind stop being so overwhelmed. They are so activated by all the stuff coming in, all the digital tools, all the information overload. And even though they love it, that's why our mind and body absorbs it. You've got to have periods of restoring and not just resting, but restoring. And you can build restoration into your moment by moment of your day by taking thinker moments. And they take 1 minute every hour and 3 minutes twice a day. So you can, or 3 to 15 minutes. So if you can, even if you initially just set the timer on your clock or just kind of get a feel, and you take a minute, and what you do for a minute is you close your eyes or you just stare blankly at something, even if you have to just, whatever, put something on a photograph of your kids or loved ones, something that you're grateful for, because gratitude, we all hear about gratitude. Gratitude immediately changes your neurophysiology. So you start your thinker moment with some gratitude thing. So I always like to think, what I do is I always just think of my kids or my dogs or something like that. And I'll just quickly think of those that puts me into gratitude. And then I switch off to the external and onto the internal. And I just let my mind wander for about a minute. And that cleans up. It's like a vacuum cleaner going through. It activates the default mode network. It changes the energy waves. It rebalances delta, theta, alpha, beta. I mean, I can go into all the technology and science, but it is unreal what it does. And then you just re-engage again. And if you do that regularly, you can do it as often as you want, but at least every hour to try and do a minute. And then try in the middle of the day, if you can, to take 10 minutes. So you could do that when you're having lunch. If you can try and not have lunch at your desk, if you can try and move away from your desk, or even turn your chair if you can't physically move away from your desk, and have a picture of nature, or have a photograph that you can, or on your screen that you can blank out your screen to everything and just have a beautiful photograph of your family or sunset or something. And then while you're eating your lunch, if that's how you have to do it, then, you know, looking at nature will help, or a loved one, because that puts you in that gratitude state, and try that think a moment. So those are two things. I can give you a million other things, but this is probably enough. Just these two things alone will help, honestly, will help so much. I know I use them, and I've trained millions around the world with those techniques.
Thank you very much. And perhaps the next question also have to be with the thinker moments, and perhaps you can expand on that. But we have a question about grief, how we manage grief, how we manage the grief of losing someone. Maybe the person died, but also someone who, in this particular question, the person is asking about the breaking of relationships. And perhaps this one's even harder, because you can actually see the person sometimes around you. So he says, how many times, how long does it take for me to be able to go through this grief? And how can I teach my brain to deal with that?
Such a good question. Yeah, there's so much. Grief is not, as you quite correctly said, is not just related to the loss of a loved one. It's also loss of relationship, loss of a pet, loss of a job, loss of a political situation, whatever. So a lot of people grieving in this United States at the moment with the political issues and all these kinds of things. So grief has many, many faces, and there's no one fixed time period that is going to take. I can't tell you your grief will be over in 63 days. All I can tell you is that it's a healing journey. And in that healing journey, there's ups and downs. If you don't mind, I'm going to share, to answer this question, I'm going to share a really simple graphic that I think is very helpful. And it's very scientific, but it's very simplistic, the way I've done this image. Sorry, guys, I'm just getting it. There you go. Okay, can you all see that?
Yes,
So
we can see it.
what you have here is a very simple version of a very scientific concept that we've been working on and doing more research on, and that's the healing journey and what happens over 63 days. So if I talk about a healing journey, obviously we're talking about something that was disruptive. The same journey of 63 days is also used for brain building. So there's also these cycles you go through, but we go through ups and downs in this healing journey. And so when it comes to something, when it comes to grief, whether it's grieving a loss of a loved one, I can't tell you, or whatever relationship, I can't tell you how many of these cycles you go through, but I do know that if you're deliberate and intentional, I know with the patients that I've worked through with grief, and our own, we've had tragedies in our life as well, is that if I didn't have the neurocycle 5 steps and following this healing journey, if I didn't know what I know, I would have fallen apart. And this is what so many of thousands of people that I've worked with have said. If you know what's coming up, and if you know when there's a down day, like for example, if you look over to days 36 to 42, you can see there's that little character I call Brainy, and he's just our mascot. I've actually got the physical little doll over here. It's just the Brainy that is the character we use to walk your mental health journey. You'll see that's in the image over there. And when you start, let's start at day 1, and I'm not going to go through the whole thing. I'm just going to go through the highlight points. At day 1, your intention is, I'm broken. I can't do this. It's terrible. You are so stuck in it, like a glass. You think of a glass, and you take a stone, and you put a stone in a shot glass. There's no room in that glass for anything except that stone. So initially, at the beginning, you stuck in that shot glass. You stuck. By day 21, that stone is the same grief, but now it's in a normal size glass. So there's a little bit of room. You can actually shake the stone around if you can visualize it, but it's the same grief, but you've got a bit more space. By day 42 or 36 to 42, maybe it's a beaker and same stone, but now I've got a lot more room. There's space around it. Doesn't mean that your story's gone away. It's still there, but you're getting space, and it's been reconstructed to a way that you can start being able to live with this. And then it gets to a bigger content, and so you can go on. So eventually we get to the point where the grief is still the same, but it's been changed in that it is in relation to the environment, the size of the beaker or glass or whatever that it's in. We have more space around it. And so when we're in a state of grief, what we want to do is, over time, we want to create that space, because the grief is something that we need to honor. There's so many details. I don't have time to explain the whole grief process, but essentially that space thing is what we want to create. And it takes this time. In that healing journey, you're going to have a burst where you actually feel okay-ish around day 2 to 7. There's a little bit of, you're still grieving, but there's a little bit of hope. And then there's these growth periods where you go up and down. But when you hit days 36 to 42, I don't have time to go through the whole healing journey, but day 36 to 42 is very significant, because at that point you've got to a point where the stone is in a beaker and there's space around it, and you think, all right, I'm still crying, I'm still sad, but I can move forward. I'm moving forward. I'm carrying on with my life. I'm being constructive. I'm able to get up in the morning. I have got those periods, but they're not controlling my every thinking moment. And then suddenly you have this dip, and you see how the thing dips and all the balls are down the bottom there. And what happens is that you get tremendous insight as you do this journey, as you grow through this, because it's a whole growth learning process. And you suddenly see the scope of your loss. And this is where, if people don't understand this, and if therapists don't guide people, and forget there aren't even enough therapists to go around. So this is why I do what I do, to try and address the equity gap in mental health treatment. We've got to help people. We can't have people waiting for someone who never is going to be there to help them because there aren't enough therapists. So I want people to understand this themselves. That's why I say education is part of the policy. But if you know as an individual, and you've got no one except you and maybe your loved ones to help you, and you know, wow, oh my gosh, I feel terrible today because I can see the scope of my loss. And now you know, wow, I'm going to battle for the next few days. I'm going to need to put some things in place. Think a moment, support systems, phone my friend, make sure I go out with this one, make sure I have that set up in place, these kinds of things. Then I can cope through that moment. But if I don't know about this, and I think I'm okay, and suddenly I get knocked, and then I think, oh, there's something wrong. I've got a brain disease, and you go and get a diagnosis. And on top of your grief, you now have a diagnosis and a drug that you definitely do not want in your brain. So that's the point here. How long it's going to take is really so up to the unique person and the experience and how you go through the process. And there is no correct time limit. It's just these cycles of 63 days as you go through, then you start the cycle again. So it's very organized. The network process rewiring is very, very organized.
Very interesting. Very interesting. We have a question from one of our colleagues. He says that, do you think the overload of digital technology is leading directly to the increased incidence, example, GDD, maybe even autism, the incidence of delays in the neural development of children?
So this is a very tough question, because if you think of a toddler mind unsupervised by a parent, you can imagine that that is going to create problems in the brain. So yes, we are seeing changes if it's not managed, but if it's managed, technology actually fires up the networks and can help to really activate, and because intelligence, is not limited. Intelligence grows throughout your entire life. We know that now. That's old science, that your IQ is this and that's it. No, you're as intelligent as you want to be. So the digital age unmanaged will create mental health problems and neurological problems. But the digital age managed will skyrocket intelligence, skyrocket into mental health to a mentally healthy place. But we are not closing the gaps big. We need to be educated to recognize, hey, the technology is not bad. The technology is being demonized. AI and all these things are being demonized. It's not the technology that should be demonized. It's the management of the technology. So we are teaching our children to manage the technology and managing the time they spend on it, and recognizing the signals of when they've been on it too long, and teaching them to recognize those signals, and teaching those teenage girls that are looking at the social media and seeing all these unrealistic bodies, and teaching them, does that make you feel? How does that make you feel? If you're having these conversations as parents, as leaders, and so on, that open conversation helps us then to manage the technology and make it work for us and not against us. But if we don't, it works against us. We get stuck in toddler mind, toddler brain, and that will result in neurological issues. Fortunately, if we catch it, doesn't matter at what point, you can rewire. And that's the hope of neuroplasticity. I have seen people that have completely lost functioning from traumatic brain injuries, go on to get written off as vegetables by their neurologists, go on to get degrees. And not just once. I've seen people that have had the worst diagnoses go on to achieve incredible things in their life. And not just one story, I can tell you thousands. And so I know from the work I've done over the last 40 years in the trenches in South Africa, in the trenches in Rwanda, in those kinds of places where I have worked, I totally believe in using the technological age to our advantage. We can make it work for us, not against us. It's education.
Okay, we have questions. Thank you very much, Dr. Lee. It's been very interesting, and we're looking at the time, but we still have time for questions, and we encourage the colleagues who are connected to. We have 266 colleagues connected right now to the session, and we encourage them to connect. There is a question that is related to drugs and or alcohol consumption in order to be able to get out of the problems that they are experiencing. So how a person can manage with the 5 steps. Maybe you can go through them slowly so that we can all go through them again and understand them, and to see how we can be able to manage all the issues that we are encountering through those steps, and to be able to rewire our brains, but this at the same time to restore, as you have mentioned.
Absolutely. Such a good question. Okay, so addiction is a big area of work that I do. It's not a disease. That's the first thing we need to understand. The biomedical model, which is the dominant model currently, which has been disproved, by the way, talks about addiction being a brain disease that you have no control over. That is a very hopeless situation, and the research shows that the more hopeless you feel, the more you'll stay addicted. So what is addiction? Addiction is a behavior pattern, and it is a behavior pattern in response to something we're experiencing in life. So as I've spoken about the signals, the signals I've spoken about are the 4 are emotions, behaviors, bodily sensations, and perspectives. They always work together. So if you have an experience, that experience wires in and it shows up in our signals. And addiction is one of the behavioral signals that is a behavioral pattern that is set up to be able to cope with something that's really adverse. So when we have something that is just so bad, and we can't deal with it, we can't face it, then it becomes something that we then create a coping mechanism, and we develop a behavior. And very often the stresses, the toxic stress that the experience or experiences or combination of experiences, because nothing's alone, it's always very complex, creates, everything's nested within other things, nested within other things. Sometimes that overwhelm builds up to the point where you just feel like you're going to explode, and you're looking for something to numb that pain. And that's where the alcohol and the drugs come in, because they are not they're not fixing anything. They're not putting something in your brain that's missing. They are psychoactive. So drugs and alcohol are psychoactive, meaning that they change the structure of the brain and the body, not just the brain, and keep you stuck in the toddler mind. It sets up a network. So as we make the decision to drink, we get stuck in that network, and it creates this feedback loop. Fortunately, the parent mind and the non-conscious mind are stronger, but you need to get there. So let me give you a quick example. Someone that I actually interviewed on one of my podcasts the other day, who actually is one of my facilitators. Her story is very interesting, where she was quite successful, teacher, family, whatever, life seemed okay, but their stresses of work and her relationship on the outside, everything looked fine, but her marriage was starting to have problems. Her kids were there were issues starting with some of her kids. Work was becoming a combination of issues. So the pressures built and it became like a pressure cooker. And so she started coping by having a glass of wine at night, and that made her so calm, and made her sleep. So she had 2, 3, 4 before she knew it, she was an alcoholic. That changed her behaviors. One thing with addiction, alcoholism and drugs and things is you develop a pattern of lying to cover. It's another behavior that's linked to it. So this whole cycle starts, and you start changing. And anyway, long story short, the family started getting affected. She attempted suicide, and she went in and out of rehabs. Rehabs are notoriously have a revolving door, because they are told that you're diseased, and once you're an addict, you're always an addict. And that's a terrible message, because you take hope away from someone, you change all the network, your person gets stuck in the toddler mind. The minute you open the door of hope, you then can say, oh, the parent's telling me I've got hope. Oh, I've got this wisdom inside of me. So what happened with this particular person is that and this is really, I'm not trying to blow my own horn, but she actually came on my podcast and reached out to us. She actually was sat in Barnes and Noble, and she was planning on how she was going to end her life again, and had been in and out of rehabs and had had enough, and she was wrecking everyone's lives around her. And she was sitting in Barnes and Noble drinking coffee, and she just went over to the self-help section. She found one of my books. I've written a lot of books. And she started reading the stuff I've been teaching you today. And she said, well, I may as well try something. And she started going through the 5 steps. And she said, okay, right now, as I'm sitting here in Barnes and Noble, I'm going to gather awareness of my emotions. I'm feeling like now, not the whole thing of the last 10 years. Now, in this moment, I feel totally helpless, hopeless, and I just want to die. My body is just, everything about my body just feels terrible. I feel sick, everything, whatever, all that. My behaviors are, I can't parent, I can't teach anymore. At the stage she had stopped teaching. And I just want to give up and do something to myself. And my perspective is that life is over for me. And so she sat and did that. I'm giving you the broad overview. Obviously, it was more detailed. Then she reflected, why am I feeling like this today, in this moment? And started answering that question. She started focusing her reflection, not in this broad, chaotic way, but just answering that question. I feel like this now. Why? It's in my body like this. Why? So very specific. Just had her little notebook, sat down there, and then she went to step 3. And then she just wrote that down. And then whatever else came to her mind, she just wrote it all down. And all kinds of things came up about this, and suddenly there were things popping up on her list about childhood and about shopping lists and about things that seemed unrelated, but it was chaos. And then she sat back and she looked at the step 4 and said, wow, this is how I'm feeling now. This is why I'm feeling like this, because I just can't be a decent parent. I can't be a decent teacher. I just can't do this anymore. That's why I'm feeling like this, but that's not the reason. Gosh, there's some reasons going on here. All these words, what is this chaos? I'm chaotic. And there's something pointing, I think it's pointing towards something that happened, or a cluster of things that happened somewhere along the line in my adolescence. I don't know what it is yet, but there's something there that I think, okay, so what can I do today to get me through the rest of today? I can finish my coffee, I can buy this book, and I can go home and I can start telling my husband and my kids that I found this and I'm going to read this book, whatever. That was what she did the very first day. 15 years later, she's actually one of my neurocycle facilitators. She pulled through, she didn't die that day, and now she helps people she basically helps people with addiction. So there's an example. And she said what the biggest message that she got was, and this is why we're going to be looking at rehabs, and that's a big part of what we want to do, is the big message she got was that you're brain diseased, this is how you're going to be forever. You've got to go on these medications. They put on a bunch of medications that made her even worse. She said that they would just increase her addiction. It was just another substance to numb. They're not fixing anything because the disease is not in the brain. There's no disease in the brain. The response is in the brain. So yes, her brain and body were messed up, and over time she's had to heal her brain and body. But the source was in her messy mind and in the experiences of her life that were unresolved.
Thank you very much, Dr. Leaf. Thank you very much for going to the steps to help us to renew our minds with these 5 steps. It's interesting. We will see how we manage to work on that. We have Gabriela that has the final words, but very happy to have been here today. Gabby, all yours.
Thank you so much. Where do I start? So first of all, I want to apologize because the time limitations, we cannot get to all of the incredible and insightful questions that people have posed in the Q&A as well as in the chat. I would like to direct you all to Dr. Leaf's website. She has a lot of very informative information posted there. And so that may be a source for some of the answers that you're looking for. And I believe that her website, there's a link from the announcement to this activity, but if not, perhaps someone can put it in the chat. But I can safely say that in this past hour and a half, my brain has changed. And the discussion by Dr. Leaf has given me so much to think about and to put into action. It's really Sometimes it's amazing when we learn what we don't know. So this is really, really tremendous information. Thank you all so much for your insightful questions and the active participation in today's session. We really have learned so much about the powerful connection between our minds and the digital content and how we can be more mindful in this digital world that we're living in. A very special thank you to Dr. Leaf for her fascinating presentation about the difference between the brain and the mind and managing your mind and mental health. The videos that Dr. Leaf shared were really impactful and helped us visualize how the brain is wired and how it goes about creating new connections. But then to learn how our increased access and reliance on the digital world can create adverse circumstances in our brains, which directly impact our mental health is really eye-opening. And then to learn how we have the power to harness this neuroplasticity to self-regulate and deconstruct and reconstruct our mind-body network to create new patterns and habits and renew our mind cycles is really empowering. So we really want to encourage you to reflect on today's takeaways, consider how you can apply these principles and habits to improve your mental well-being and digital habits. And before we wrap up, I'd like to invite you all to take the next step in making a positive impact, not only on your own mental health, but also in fostering a more inclusive and supportive community. Here at PAHO for us and in your respective organizations throughout the world, we're really grateful that you were able to join us. We're excited that we'll be able to invite PAHO personnel to join the new Disability Inclusion Affinity Group, which will be a space dedicated to learning, sharing, and advocating for greater accessibility and inclusion in all aspects of our life, including our digital lives. And we encourage you and your organizations to do the same if you don't already have affinity groups in place to look into that, whether you're looking to become more involved or connected with like-minded individuals or contribute to ongoing initiatives. Participation is the way to go. We're also working here at PAHO on upcoming activities focused on disability inclusion and other types of diversity. Be sure to stay tuned for details. We hope you can join us and that we can share these both within our organization and external. And most of all, thank you all for your questions and participation today. We look forward to continuing this journey together. Take care and stay engaged. Thank you. And thank you to Anna for her incredible contributions.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, everybody.